Good morning. As I think I mentioned before, that in addition to performing and having things, that I've played on the YouTube channel, talking about something in my experience is also going to be part of it. Earlier on, as you remember, I talked a bit about my time at Juilliard, and I also talked about my practicing and memorizing methods. And I thought I would, talk about two other items today, which I've experienced in the course of my concert travels. Sitting just in my living room here, and behind me, this is just as way of background if you want, behind me on this shelf I have a couple of items which are real artifacts. There are a couple of watch cases from Cunard's ship Lusitania, which was torpedoed in 1915 and sank, and there was only one salvage job ever done on it. And there are a couple of watch cases which are over there under those little explanatory items there. Up above here is a piece of china from the White Star ship Atlantic. The disaster of the Atlantic in 1873 off Nova Scotia was the White Star's Line biggest disaster before Titanic in 1912. That's a piece of china that was recovered. Here there's a plate from Titanic's sister ship Olympic. This was some passenger had been given this in the 1920s. This book is by Second Officer Lightoller, who was one of the principal people in the whole Titanic story, and he wrote a book afterwards about this disaster. And actually, from the 1930s, that's, I think, one of the earliest paperback books around. I didn't even know the paperback books existed in the 1930s. I have some more artifacts over here in this, what looks like a notebook there. There's a piece of what's called wreckwood, floating wreckage. There's a little piece of cane, which was taken off a deck chair, which was being repaired, and the Canadian Museum in Manitoba had owned that chair for quite a while. And a couple of other items here. In this container right here, there's a piece of wood which is from the Harland and Wolff shipyard where Titanic was built. And to this day, you can still smell the oil on it. It's soaked into that wood. So these are just a few items that are here on this shelf. And I have a couple other items from Titanic on the wall over there, which Suzanne here will show very, very briefly. There's a piece of cork from Madeline Astor's life jacket. She was the wife of the richest man on board, John Jacob Astor. That's genuine. This isn't because I say so. I mean, the provenance is real from this. Then up above to the left of it is a piece of metal which is from what was called the Arrow, A-R-R-O-L, the Arrow gantry. It was the largest gantry in the world, and it was under that the Titanic and the sister ship were built in Belfast at the Harland and Wolff shipyard. And then further up on the next level there, above there, is another piece of what's called wreckwood, part of the floating wreckage which was picked up after the sinking. So it's really very nicely framed. And then of course I've got a nice model of Titanic right there. And alongside with it is a picture of me with Milvina Dean, who was the last and youngest survivor. I met her at a convention in London in 2000 and had a photo with her. In fact, she wanted to hear me play when I told her what I do. And there was a piano there where we were, and I was just about to do it. And I remember I was going to play the Mendelssohn Rondo Capriccioso for her, but we were all called for a group photograph at that moment, and the moment was lost. She passed away in, it was 1997. But she was the last, and she was only a baby on board, but she was there. And she was the only survivor that I met. So I have an interest in Titanic and the White Star Line ever since the James Cameron movie came out. So I have some of these items here on the wall and in this cabinet, plus, as I said, from Lusitania and the Atlantic, the White Star. Anyways, I'm just mentioning this as a kind of by way of atmosphere, background, whatever you want to call this. Because what I want to talk today about are two items that I experienced, in the course of my pianistic activities. And actually, it's almost appropriate to mention the first subject, because I hear we're going to be knowing about what films are going to be getting the Oscars in Hollywood, right? I think that's coming up if I heard the news correctly. Well, I'm going to tell you first about the time when I actually held a real Oscar in my hands, because I did. I actually held a real Oscar man. Now, I wasn't awarded an Oscar. No, I'll never make that claim. But I held it. And this took place in 1971. A friend of mine in California, a composer friend of mine, had invited me to come and be part of a project there in Los Angeles to record several American chamber works by American composers. A couple of the works were his. I wasn't involved in his works, but I was involved in a work by a composer named Ernest Gold. It's called Symphony for 5 Instruments. I had never heard of Ernest Gold before. I didn't know really anything about him at that time, but when I found out something about it, I found that he was a serious composer, but he also wrote something very, very famous for Hollywood, for which he got an Oscar. And that was that famous theme to Exodus. It was a film, long ago film, about the founding of Israel in 1948. And the theme is quite well known, actually. And I'm going to hum it for you. This is my Metropolitan Opera debut right now. Excuse me. Da dee 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 da 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 dum dee 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 dee. I'm sure many of you have heard this. This is the theme to Exodus. So he got an Oscar for that particular theme. Well, anyways, I was the only non-Californian as part of this project. And I remember I was flown out to LA, and this is 1971 again, as I mentioned. And he met me at the airport. He was already an elderly man at that time. And we went to the studio to do the recording, and he conducted for us. So there was 5 instruments, viola, violin, what was the other instrument? Oboe, I think. I can't fully remember all of it, but there's 5 instruments. And this was being made for a company called Crystal Records, as I remember, an LP, Crystal Records. Well, after the recording, we went to his home for a little reception. And I saw his Oscar sitting on his desk, the one he got for the theme to Exodus. So I picked it up and I held it. And I remember being impressed. Boy, this thing is heavy. You could really use this as a club to bash someone with it. Heavy son of a gun this thing was. So I held it a little bit, watched a little bit. I also saw a little Grammy, one of those Grammys, sitting on his desk as well. So yes, so I held the real Oscar, and I remember being impressed by the fact that it was pretty heavy, So I had that chance, to actually do that. But no, I would never claim that I won it for anything. No, I just held this Oscar. So yes, so that happened in that year, 1971. I think that recording is still available. It's probably, you can get it on CD. Ernest Gold Symphony for 5 Instruments. Has a kind of a sad and kind of an intense feeling about it, because I remember there was a motto in the printed score from the Lamentations of Jeremiah in the Bible. So it's a very kind of a sad, intense thing. It's several movements and interesting work. So maybe you could find it. Simply for 5 Instruments by Ernest Gold. So that's my my Oscar experience. The other thing I want to mention is an experience I had on one of my Australian tours. I've been going to Australia every 2 years since 1979. Later this year, sort of September into November, my 24th tour there is being planned. So I know Australia extremely well. Been around almost everywhere at one point or another. If I haven't played there, at least I've driven through it or been there. And this took place on one of my earlier tours. I think it was either 1989 or 1991. I have to check my my date book about it. It was one of those 2 years. It was regarding a recital that I had in the small town of Wyndham, which is the northernmost town in Western Australia, really. Anything north of that are the small Aboriginal settlements, but it's sort of the northernmost town. It's a little bit west of the Northern Territory. And of course, these were the days before the internet, right? So I had a couple other concerts in Eastern Australia earlier on that tour. And I remember sending a postcard to the Arts Council in Wyndham just to tell them when I would be arriving. And at that time, I was traveling more by buses there. Wasn't yet driving too much as I did later on. I would rent cars, and I'm thoroughly fluent. Left side of the road driving. There's no big deal about that at all. But the point is, at that time, I was still doing more traveling on the buses. Now I remember that after I did those several concerts in the eastern states, I flew up to Darwin in the Northern Territory just to be there, because I'd been to Darwin before. I just liked the city. I think I spent maybe 2 days there or something. And then I took the Greyhound bus. Now the Australian Greyhound bus is a different company than the American Greyhound bus. And actually it's a little bit older by its founding. And I've traveled with it a number of times. And I took the Greyhound bus there towards Wyndham. It was an all-day trip pretty much. And I remember as we drove on and on, we passed the Victoria River, and I remember seeing a fairly large crocodile on the riverbank as we went by. And finally we got to where I was supposed to be going. Now, if you're going to the town of Wyndham, which is a small town, it's not on the main highway there. There's a junction, which is called the Wyndham Junction, and whoever's going to Wyndham is going to be met there. And it's about 35 miles from there into the town itself, but it's simply just a junction. So this was about 7 o'clock in the evening. The sun was setting. Remember, this is the northern part of Australia, so the weather is nice and warm. It's more tropical the further north you go. The driver said to me, "Are you sure you want to get out here? There's nobody out there waiting for you." And I said, well, I told these people I'm supposed to be here this time. I don't know. He suggested maybe you want to go to the next town. It's called Halls Creek, another small town, 100 miles further down. Remember, the distances in Australia in the outback between towns is very frequently something like that. But he said, oh, people will come out 100 miles to pick you up if they have to. I said, well, I don't know. No, I did tell people, I don't know what's going on here, but I think I better get off here. So, took my suitcase, off I went out. That's simply a junction. There's no gas station there. There's no anything there. It's simply two roads intersecting. Well, the bus went off, and there I am standing with a suitcase, looking around, wondering what's going on. It's getting darker and darker. Moon was out, though. At least I could see what time it was. Hardly any traffic at all, because in the outback areas of Australia, traffic is very light to begin with. Very light. And I was wondering, well, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do next, but I'm waiting for some vehicle to be going towards Wyndham. Well, hardly any vehicle in any direction went by. Then it started to get really dark. The moon started to set a little bit, and I started to realize, well, I'm probably going to be here through the night. So that's exactly what happened. As the moon set and as things got darker, I decided to find a soft spot on the ground next to the junction, and with my smaller case, you use a kind of a pillow or a headrest. I just laid down. I didn't sleep or anything. It was basically killing time. I must say I was a bit apprehensive as to what wild animals might be out there. For some reason I thought there might be buffalo, and that's a bad scene. You don't want to run into buffalo, at all. Later I realized, no, they're in the Northern Territory where they're not in that area. But at that time I thought of that, and got me a little bit apprehensive on that. But what I did hear later on at night, I heard a couple of dingoes, the wild dogs, some were howling, some were not too far away. Now, a dingo is a medium-sized dog, a yellowish dog, semi-domesticated by some of the Aborigines, but it is a wild dog, Normally they don't attack humans except unless maybe a baby or an infant, but they don't normally do that. But I did hear them, and I think there were at least two of them somewhere not too far away. So for part of the night, I heard the sound of some dingoes somewhere in the area. But other than that, I did not see any or hear or any other animals. Now, halfway through the time when I was there, a truck went by, and I thought he saw me, and he went a little bit further ahead and stopped. So I was just observing what's going on. For a fair bit of time, nothing happened. It was just stopped there. And then I saw the driver get out with a flashlight, going around his truck, and after a short bit of time, he turned out his lights, and I realized, oh, so there is a truck that's about 100 feet from me. Someone's going to be probably sleeping there or whatever, which was the case, actually. So for half the night, there was a truck that was about 100 feet from me, parked in the same area. But I spent all night down there, just killing time, listening to what, if there was any out there, and there was just those couple of dingoes that I heard. Well, when daylight came, I decided, no, I've got to hitchhike in here. I don't know what the hell happened here, but I got to get going somehow if I can. So, remember, I'm at the junction here. Here's the main road. It goes from east, from town toward Connemara, towards that smaller town that I mentioned before, Halls Creek. And then going this way is the road to Wyndham. So I'm right at that corner. So I'm looking at the main road, seeing what vehicle's coming from where. Well, I see someone coming from the Halls Creek direction. Is this car going to turn towards Wyndham? Nope, it's going straight towards Connemara. I see one coming from that direction, going towards Halls Creek. A couple cars came from Wyndham, but they were going onto the main roads with trailers, or caravans as they call them in Australia. And but hardly anyone was going towards Wyndham. And the few that didn't stop. Here I am, hitchhiking, thinking to myself, wait a minute, do I look like a criminal? I have a suitcase here, I have a bag here, but no one's stopping. What the hell's going on here? Of course, the sun's coming up. There's no shade there. It's very direct sun. Well, after a short while, I was starting to get a little bit worried about that fact and whether I was going to be picked up. And I was prepared, if I had to stand all day on that junction, and then when the Greyhound came again later that day, that same one that I was on, that same schedule, I was going to get on it and go on to Halls Creek, and they would never have known in Wyndham why I never showed up for the concert, but there was no way to let anybody know. Well, fortunately, a young couple did stop and gave me a lift, and we had a good laugh when I told them, believe it or not, I'm a concert pianist trying to get to Wyndham here, and I mentioned the name of the lady who was in charge of the Arts Council, the one I had written to. And they said, oh, yes, we know who she is. She works at our local little airport, and we'll bring you there. Well, we arrived at that little airport. She wasn't in yet, but there was another lady who was in who knew who I was. So I think she was also a member of the Arts Council. So she called the other one up to tell me I was there. Then the other one showed up and said, oh, welcome. We're so happy to see you here. You're here a bit earlier than we thought, but welcome. And I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean, a little earlier? I sent you a card, a couple of weeks earlier, said I'm going to be on that Greyhound. Didn't you get the card? No. Later that day, that card arrived. 2 weeks for an internal postcard in Australia. And people later told me, oh yeah, we're not surprised, the way Australia Post works. We're not surprised. So that's the reason. They never knew I arrived. And there I was on the ground with dingoes out there somewhere because the mail never arrived. Look, this is all pre-internet. Now it wouldn't happen, They would have gotten an email message or whatever. This was 1989 or 91. It's one of those 2 years. And I say I got to check in my date books when this happened. So it's an absolute true story. Now, as a kind of a sequel, if you want to call it that, like 4 years later, I was on the same bus again, but I was going further west, so I was going to the town of Broome, which is a resort town on the northwest coast of Western Australia. And you have to pass through that same junction when you do that. And I remember being on the bus as we approached that junction, thinking to myself, if only these people on the bus knew what kind of drama had occurred here 4 years earlier, because no one knew anything. And we went by that junction, and guess what? It looked exactly the same. Not a change, no gas station, no nothing, just two roads intersecting. And there I was. Now, can you imagine any concert pianist doing something like that? But I'm a very adaptable person. You do what you gotta do. So I did what I had to do at that time. Absolute true story. So these are your tales for today, so to speak. And as time goes on, I'm going to be talking about other things that occurred in the course of my travels, experiences I had. And it'll be interspersed with, of course, performances. So the next thing will be another performance, which I think we'll wait about 2 days, to put that on. Well, I hope you enjoyed this little talk, and you'll be hearing other things too. So have a nice day.